walking to fireworks. Yeah.
Good morning, all. It is Monday, July 7th, 2025. This is a workshop meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. We are live in the City Hall Commissioners Room, second floor. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to call this meeting to order at exactly 9 o'clock a.m. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start off with roll call. Commissioner Mark Saunders, absent. Commissioner Suzanne Good.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski, absent. Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Bunky Markert.
Here.
Commissioner Craig Thier.
Here.
Mayor Stan Mills is here, and while we don't have the full complement of the mayor commissioners, we do have a quorum and are able to formally conduct business today. Thank you all for being here. With that, I'd also like to introduce Marco Avila, is over behind the computers over there. Taylor Tedder, city manager, is here. City solicitor Lisa Bourne-Ogden is here. Assistant City Manager Evan Miller, Chief of Police Keith Banks, and Jillian, I don't know last names, Jillian and Gwen, I'm sorry, two interns. Thank you all for being here. Henry Matlos is in the back corner, Public Works Director, and Lynn Cohen, Communications Specialist. Thank you all for being here today. There is no correspondence identified. With that, I'd like to go right to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, commissioners. So first item on my report is the Canal dock update. Wallace Montgomery and Stable Ground have continued monitoring the Canal dock. City staff did receive documentation late last week that it is okay to and safely to reopen the dock. Prior to reopening, 3 things do need to be done by way of temporary repairs. In keeping with the interest of this project, we will continue to reevaluate every 30 days. Further evaluation on permanent next steps and potential resolutions will be ongoing. Holiday water usage. Total usage was slightly down over last 4th of July weekend. Good news is that the tower levels, although lowered during the weekend at peak demands, didn't drop anywhere near as significantly as last year. We do believe that the call for voluntary conservation and requesting to irrigate on alternate days does help. Voter registration. The deadline to register to vote in the city's August 9th municipal election is this Thursday, July 10th. The city charter does require that voter registration be completed in person here at City Hall. In-person voting will take place from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday, August 9th at the Convention Center. Absentee ballot requests may be submitted online or by contacting the election office at 302-227-6181, extension 159. Lifeguards competing in Rehoboth Beach this week. Once again, the Rehoboth Beach Patrol will host some 300 lifeguards from states stretching from Virginia to New York as they compete in the United States Life Saving Association's Mid-Atlantic Regional Championships this Wednesday, July 9th. Competitions in running, swimming, and the perennial favorite Beach Flags events begin at 8 a.m. on the beach at Baltimore Avenue. The public is invited to come watch and support the lifeguards. That concludes my report this morning, and I'm here for any questions you may have.
Any questions of the city manager?
Yeah, Mayor, if I could, please.
Commissioner Thier?
Yes, on the Canal dock, you said 3 things before you could open it. I'm not sure I caught the 3 things.
So those include, there's a lip where the boards meet the concrete, so we're gonna have to do one of those sort of rubber mats to cover that so it's ADA accessible. There's also an issue with the mechanism opening the gate, and then we have to address the landscaping as it's kind of been sitting there.
What's the timing to get those 3 things completed?
I'm not sure, but as soon as we know, I can let you know.
Anybody else?
Mayor,
Commissioner Good?
2 issues, a follow-up to Commissioner Thier. Do you know an approximate cost, and will it be Wallace Montgomery executing these 3 minor items, or can the streets and parks departments do some of it?
We should be able to do all of these ourselves, and
Great.
it should be a negligible cost. I'm not sure, but $1,000 maybe, negligible.
Sounds good. And, I know that there's been monitoring of it. So every 30 days, meaning annual, like all 12 months of the year, is that the current plan?
Right now, we just need to continue monitoring, but right, yeah.
Okay, I'm disappointed there. I hoped you would provide an update on litigation before the city in the case of the April 8th, 2024 city manager contract. The citizens are funding the defense in this lawsuit. They are entitled to full information
Commissioner Good.
about potential.
Commissioner Good, this is not the time. That was the city manager's report. We'll be moving on to the next agenda item. We will
You do
be
not have
moving
the right.
on.
It is the people's money that is being spent.
Commissioner Good.
Only the commissioners who were involved in
We
that
will
bad decision
suspend
have
this
been-
meeting.
Have been informed of what's going on.
We will suspend this meeting.
Suzanne?
Why would you suspend
We
this
will
meeting?
suspend
This
this
is-
meeting. You are out of order.
I have tried to get
You are
answers about
out
this
of order.
for 10 days.
Suzanne, enough, please.
This is
no
germane
you
to
no-
the taxpayers.
you no
have the
longer-
people who are
Suzanne.
compromised on this decision making the decision about how to proceed.
What's your secret
You haven't
number,
informed
10?
Commissioner Saunders or me,
We will
or to my knowledge.
suspend this meeting.
I suspend the meeting because we have a
No.
conflict of interest with those handling a lawsuit. They have to confer with the whole board rather than doubling
Commissioner.
down on their bad decision and
Commissioner,
handling it by
stop.
themselves. Well,
Stop.
that's not how the people's money should be spent.
Mayor, I move
on
to adjourn the
litigation.
meeting.
Second.
Well,
There's
when
a
you
motion
when
and a
you
second.
when you don't get answers from multiple emails and queries,
I
you don't
move-
have a choice but to ask
Make
in
a motion
published
to adjourn
session.
this meeting.
We have a motion on the floor that preempts everything, and that is to adjourn the meeting. Is
I
there-
second it.
We have a motion by Commissioner
Commissioner
Patrick.
Gossett.
Transparency
Patricia
out the window.
Gossett, and a second by Commissioner Bunky Marker to adjourn the meeting. Is there any further discussion?
So are you adjourning for the day?
Adjourning is done. Once this is done, we are beyond FOIA, and we're
Mayor,
not.
my motion
not able
was
to
made
catch-
because of the disruption by a commissioner. We have guests in the audience that are here to present topics on the agenda. The discussion that was started by a commissioner was not on the agenda. It is not to be discussed as it's not on the agenda.
Commissioners have the right to discuss any topic they please. They were elected by the voters to bring up topics of public money being
Suzanne,
spent.
you are out of order. We have a guest here. I wish we could continue because
Yes, a
we brought him
consultant
here.
is here. That is true.
And
Fine.
if you don't curb yourself, then
Well, there's
I'm
a
sure
problem.
everybody will vote.
There's a big problem.
I would like you to curb. If you want to bring it up at the end of the meeting, that's fine.
Okay, and under commissioner comments, good enough.
Although then I have to caution you, that is not for agenda topics.
Mayor, I withdraw my motion.
I withdraw my
Oh,
second.
your second. Again, you're withdrawing it based upon Commissioner Good being silent and letting us proceed.
Exactly.
All righty. Is there any other?
There's no solicitor's report today.
Okay.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Just take a moment to recognize the incredible support that we had over the weekend for the July 5th fireworks. Corey Grawl and his bandstand staff, Joe Hengel and the Convention Center staff, and the police force led by Chief Banks and Captain Jamie Riddle. We can't do it without them. It was an incredible turnout, very smooth operation. Just to give some background on this, most of the police officers here worked 18-hour shifts. We had support from 13 different municipalities that brought in other officers and support staff from around the county. We also had support from Newcastle County officers, DENREC Fish and Wildlife DelDOT, and DART Transportation, as long as the state police also played an important role in this with Troop 7, the Special Operations Response Team, and the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Motor and Mounted Police Patrols. Again, it couldn't be done without them. I just, again, want to extend my personal thanks and all of the thanks of the commissioners to the staff that worked so hard to bring this event to us, in the sense that everybody has a great time, but there are many, many hundreds of people that work behind the scenes to make this a safe and enjoyable time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to essentially this meeting focuses, if you could tell by reading the agenda, on beach nourishment. So we have a lot of topics here to go over. I'm going to ask that you hold your questions and answers to the end of the entire multi-presentation here. First, I want to start off by introducing Tony Pratt. Tony Pratt is a Delaware coastal consultant specializing in coastal erosion and sediment deposition issues, sea level rise impacts, coastal community resilience, and coastal government affairs. Tony served as Department of Natural Resources and Environment Controls Administrator of the Shoreline and Waterway Management Section within DNREC and is currently retired from DNREC after 38 years with them. Tony served as President and Executive Director of the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. He is currently the Executive Director of the Bay Beach Association and consults for all Delaware coastal beach communities, including Rehoboth Beach. Tony and I will be tag teaming a presentation on beach nourishment, and he will be sharing his expertise and opinions on the DNREC replenishment cost-sharing study and the seaside to statewide economic study with which he has great familiarity. Again, we'll hold off questions to the end because it's such a broad set of presentations. Your question hopefully will be answered by the time we get to the end. I'd like to make note that many of us know that the City of Rehoboth Beach was founded in 1873 as the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. Camp Meeting Association later became a town and adopted its current name 20 years later in 1893. The arrival of the railroad in 1878 significantly boosted its growth, transforming it into a bustling resort where the beach and the boardwalk have always been the major attractions. The first boardwalk was built in 1873, built on high ground between the beach and Surf Avenue, which ran the full length of the ocean front. Many storms damaged the boardwalk, and when rebuilt, the boardwalk's configuration changed slightly over the years. I'd like to share a little history of the dunes in Rehoboth Beach. Note that the protective dunes have not always been there. As you can see in this photograph, at least in 1900, and I believe going back to 1873, there were no dunes, at least in what areas are pictured here. If we continue and we look at, Tony, if you know of any dates of these, maybe shout them out, but some of these are from the Delaware Archives and they are undated, but this shows you that a couple things. One is that there's no dunes directly in front of the boardwalk, and also how wide the beach appeared to be at that time. This is also an undated photograph, and I think the important things to make note here are, again, that there is no dune. And also, if you look at the end of Rehoboth Avenue, this area here, highlighted by my arrow, is all concrete. The end used to be all concrete, and it used to be touted as that's where they used to do dances several times a week. Notice in front of the concrete area, there is a bulkhead there for some protection. Notice the stairs here to get up onto the boardwalk from the beach level. But also, while there's bulkhead here, notice on the other part that's pictured, there are no bulkheads. It's just the water that would go directly underneath and potentially do damage there. With that, this is again an undated photograph. It shows a beach without a boardwalk. Without a dune. It shows again for orientation, the concrete area at the end of Rehoboth Avenue, the stairs going down to the beach area. And I don't know whether this is high tide or low tide, but you can see the water has come up to about this point. One of the things I guess I would like you to do is envision a dune, today's dune, put in this location, and you'll see that it ends up netting a very, very narrow beach area there. Compare that, though, to this dated photograph, 2005. Again, this is Dewey Beach way down here. So we're looking southerly. In 2005, this was a picture at tide going out. You can see if you look real carefully, the high tide mark was right about here, which meant there could only be maybe one, maybe two umbrellas at the time. And you'll need just stand at the microphone. Yeah. You'll need to stand at the microphone.
I took this picture. And the one before. I was at Denmark for a long time, and I took this photograph. This was actually Friday of Memorial Day weekend, 2005. What you are difficult to see is that was the year that Nourishment started in Dewey Beach and then Rehoboth Beach. And in the background, way up there at the top, is the dredge, and it's working in Rehoboth. By Memorial Day weekend, this is how much dry sand was being offered to your visitors. There wasn't a whole lot. And it's a very big disincentive, of course, for tourism. The fortunate thing is that the dredge moved down to Rehoboth, and on July 3rd, late in the middle of the day, Chief, you remember this, we were all kind of sweating, and Henry Horsey was confronting me on the boardwalk every day. When are you going to get finished? July 3rd, we finished Rehoboth Beach and opened a much wider beach with a dune that was planted later in the fall. But that was Memorial Day weekend of 2005.
Thank you. Another thing I'd like to point out, besides the high tide mark, is here's Star of the Sea in the upper right. And if you recall, right on the south side of Star of the Sea is Laurel. And at this time, if you recall, there were dunes from Laurel southerly to the southern tip of the boardwalk, but there were no dunes, as you can see here, going in a northerly direction. And we'll come back to that when we hit the history of beach nourishment. We'll remind ourselves of that. One of the things I'd like to go to next is a mention of memorable storms. Obviously, memorable storms, meaning storms that do damage. They cause erosion and do damage to the boardwalk and infrastructure. These are 1962, as Ash Wednesday was a nor'easter. 20 years later, there was another nor'easter. In 1998, 6 years later, almost back to back, we had two major storms. On the Mother's Day storm, there was a nor'easter in 2008. There was Hurricane Sandy thrown in there 2012. And then Winter Storm Jonas in January 2016. While we're on Jonas winter storm in 2016, does anybody know what's missing from this photograph?
The dune.
The dune. The dune is 100% wiped out there. So if you can orient yourself, this is in front of the Stuart Kingston and Hennepin Hotel and Condos. The entire dune is gone. This has been smoothed out afterwards and start of reparations, if you will. One of the other things I wanted you to notice for comparison to later is the structure. This is a highly engineered replacement boardwalk that we put in. And it's got, instead of the telephone poles, it's got the concrete piers with steel inside. And we've got concrete beams going across there. The water not only took away the dunes, but it went underneath, and then having nowhere to go, the energy went up and popped all the boards off and broke everything, and that's where we had to do a lot of reparations in that one area. What it shows is, for me, is these storms occurred over 60 years. There were only 5 memorable, significant damage-producing nor'easters during that time, and just one memorable hurricane. While you're up, Maybe could you explain the difference between a nor'easter and a hurricane in terms of frequency, in terms of potential for damages and et cetera?
So I have a tendency to be really geeky, and so I'm going to try to geek this down as best I can because it's a combination of storm forces as well as the dynamics of sand movement under forcing. I know that sounds pretty geeky, but there are some, before I talk about the difference between hurricanes and northeasters, the Halloween storm called the perfect storm, whatever you want to call it, was an interesting storm, and that it generated from a low pressure system off of the Massachusetts New England coastline. We all read the book and saw the movie about the perfect storm. It generated waves that were very large, but most notably had a period, a crest period, passing of about 15, 16 seconds. A typical day on the beach, and this gets to the storm type in a second. But that was a warm core decaying hurricane out in the ocean, and it created a wave that was 16 seconds apart between crests. And those waves have a tremendous upthrust, and in the case of Rehoboth, before the dune, it eroded the front part of the beach and threw sand toward the boardwalk so that the sand was at the boardwalk level. And that was in October, and in the winter, we had a northeaster, which gave a ramp that put water over the boardwalk and into buildings, which was a very interesting setup. Beaches are dynamic, horizontally and vertically. Storms, hurricanes, and northeasters. A hurricane is what's called a warm core storm. It forms in the tropics. It's a dissipation of heat coming out of the mid-latitudes, and it generates a funnel system in the middle where air is rushing into the middle and rolling up through the eye, and as it spins toward that, it's like pulling the plug on your bathtub and watching the whirlpool form. It's the same kind of phenomenon. It's a force going into a center, and it generates very large waves and very large period of in-between waves, which are uprush waves, and they tend to flow across the countryside very quickly. But they also last about 5 hours. And we had Hurricane Gloria, 1985. We had 70, 80-mile-an-hour winds out of the northeast. For most of the morning, we went close to the eye. It got pretty calm, and then we had 70-mile-an-hour winds out of the northwest. In Lewis, we had one of the highest tides in the Canal in the morning and one of the lowest tides ever seen in the afternoon. It's dynamic, but it lasts 5, 6, 7 hours typically. Northeasters, however, are nagging storms. They are not as powerful. They're cold, what's called cold core. They're formed by a different dynamic completely. They still spin in a counterclockwise direction because it's a low pressure system. But it generates, typically off our coast, a northeast wind that can last, in the case of 62, 5 consecutive high tides. And it's that duration that will churn. In the case of the 62 northeaster, the center was developing a series of centers developed and translated. There was almost 1,000 miles of ocean of which northeast winds were blowing and created a tremendous wave set and a tremendous amplified tide, and it hit for 5 consecutive tides, and it kept chewing away at the beach and chewing away at the beach and chewing away at the beach. Northeasters are kind of like a snowblower. They'll dip into the front of the beach and they keep eroding it back, and you have these scarp lines that'll form, these cliffs that'll form, and they translate across the beach through the dry berm into the dune, and sometimes when the dune is gone, there's an example right there of that. Hurricanes typically drive waves at a faster rate across the dune and sort of dissolve the dune and watch it just sort of wash down as you would a sandcastle that you build. So different types of storms, different kind of effects, but the beach responds in a similar way. It erodes by a couple of different means.
Thank you, Tony. Just 2 more pictures there. This is in front of Atlantic Sands. You can see the whole dune is gone. And then this is down St. Lawrence Avenue where the dune has been pushed up into the street end there. So the value of our boardwalk is proved as each time our boardwalk was damaged, we rebuilt it, including a planned 100% ground-up rebuild in 2008, 2010, with better engineering to provide better storm survivability. Again, compare this, this is likely from the storm of 62, I guess. And it shows that the piers were telephone poles and the beams were wood. Again, compare that to the concrete structure we have now for much, much better storm survivability. So essentially, we've learned over the years that engineering beaches with wide, high dunes and a wide beach brought us the benefits of minimizing damage to infrastructure. In this way, dunes are sacrificial, prefer to lose the dunes over receiving damage to the infrastructure. So let's take a short lesson in beach nourishment. You've probably heard of the terms nourishment, renourishment, replenishment. I think they're all interchangeable, pretty much, Nourishment might apply to the first time it's done, and then when you're doing maintenance, you're renourishing or something. But essentially, they're all the same. Beach nourishment projects are designed to widen and elevate the beach to provide protections against coastal storms. Beach nourishment or beach replenishment are the placement of imported sand onto the beach, possibly including the creation of dunes the first time, or if the dunes were already there, maintaining the dunes per a template designed by the Army Corps of Engineers. And we'll talk about that template a little later. So I've talked about imported sands. Some of the beach nourishment projects up in the Bayside, I think, have had sand trucked in. But we, of course, use the dredges. Of note of this is 2013. I don't know whether this was a nourishment as a result of storm damage or whether it was just our typical three-year cycle. But the thing to note here is how narrow the beach is. And then same thing here. This one you can see the equipment putting sand on the beach, and here's the dredge out here in the ocean. The dredge, of course, goes out into the ocean to a particular site and sucks up sand and water, comes back, and puts it through this pipe onto shore. So what's important to note here is just the progress that's being made to widen the beach. And compare this to the finished product. This is looking down from the Boardwalk Plaza Hotel, looking south. This is the same viewpoint looking north. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you is just a mention of the grasses. The grasses play a very important part in maintaining the sands and the beach and preventing erosion. The dunes are planted with Cape American beach grass. These are grasses that flourish above the dunes and trap the sand for natural growth of the dunes and protect against strong wind that would erode and diminish the dune. For this reason, because of the fragility of the grasses, this is why we protect them with fences and try to keep people from walking on the sands. The grasses are often planted by volunteers prior to mid-April when it gets too hot, I think, at that point, and they have to turn it off. For many years, we would have recurring volunteer activities, and I don't think we've had them of late, but the grasses being there are still very important. What I'd like to do now is use this photograph perhaps so Tony can talk about the science, if you will, of beach dune design, engineering, criteria having to do with the depth of the beach from the toe of the dune to the water line, the width of the dunes, and anything else you can as far as design templates that are applicable to the Rehoboth Dewey project.
Sure, thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's an interesting evolution of shore management over a century or so of time. Prior to the 1930s or 40s, it was most commonly beach erosion, which is an interesting term, which I'll wax poetic on in just a second. But beach erosion was addressed by hard structure, typically bulkheads, seawalls, what engineers call groins, we all call jetties. Jetties are technically found in inlets, and the groins are what trap literal sand moving along the shore. Literal means longshore, moving along the beach from wave energy. Delaware has predominantly a flow from south to north up to Cape Henlopen every year. When the engineers, the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association was founded in 1926 by engineers from the Corps of Engineers who said we have to do a better job. We have to do something different. The amenity of beaches is not being addressed through hard structures. And so we claim that the very first design with nature, green answer, soft solution was beach nourishment as opposed to seawalls and revetments, big rock revetments. If you go to Monmouth and New Jersey, up in the northern end, you'll see a giant, massive boulder wall. If you go to the north end of Cape May, you'll see a boulder wall. That was typically how beach erosion was addressed, but it didn't address the amenity and the loss of sand over time. And I'm a geologist by training. We talk about sea level rise like it's a new thing. It's not. We have been seeing a rise in sea level for the last 15 to 18,000 years. Before that, the sea was much higher. They found fossil remains of aquatic animals up in Smyrna, Delaware, from a previous high stand of the sea. The last ice age, the ocean at the Atlantic seaboard dropped below the edge of the continental shelf. The rivers flowed over the edge and created these big chasms where people go fishing now. The Baltimore Canyon, the Wilmington Canyon. Those are river-dug canyons. The sea level's risen back up, come across the continental shelf, and it is where it is today. Our background erosion rate on human timescales, because those are not human timescales. Those are 10, 15, 20,000 year leaps in time. But in the decadal kind of time frames that we're looking at, we have determined, DNREC has determined, that the original erosion rate of our beaches is somewhere in the magnitude of 3 to 4 to 5 feet per year. So it's a matter of time when you put infrastructure in place that doesn't move and the beach is being lost over time, you're either going to impact the infrastructure, lose the sand that is the amenity, providing less of a buffer. So the solution, the green solution of putting sand on the beach was developed in the 1930s and 40s. Coney Island was like the first one ever done, and it's moved all along. Atlantic City, Miami Beach was a great example of what happens to urban decay of a community when the beach is not attended to. And Miami Beach went from a luxurious 1920s, 1930s, spa-oriented, wonderful place to escape to community, to one where there was hotels falling down and a lot of drug dealers living in hotels because you only had to pay $30 a week to live there because there was no other demand. When the beach was restored, the economy fully came back, and look at the glory that is Miami Beach and South Beach today. That's because of the beach. So clearly, post-World War II, baby boom, an affluent society, a change in the way we as a society made money created a far greater recreational demand on beaches. So there was an economic imperative to do something other than just put up a wall, cross your fingers that the wall would keep the ocean back and the beach disappears. In the case of Rehoboth Beach, you saw the previous pictures where there was a boardwalk and literally a drop down. We saw 2005 Memorial Day weekend, probably 10 to 12 feet of dry sand. By putting a beach and dune back, like we see here, we create the recreational amenity, we have the protection amenity that we're looking forward to, we have longevity, but it goes to the engineers and the scientists, typically in the Corps of Engineers, who analyze the kind of background erosion rate, but more importantly, what is causing the erosion, the causative effect. It's a number of things. I'm not going to get into it. We don't have time today to have a whole course on Ocean Dynamics 101, but they look at everything and they design a beach that is going to withstand, in the case of Rehoboth, and do 3 years of erosion. And the way they create that is they have a dune that's ideal. They have a berm width, dry berm width that's ideal. When they pump the sand across initially, when the first nourishment occurred in 2005, they were pumping into 10 to 12 feet of water. And the outer level of that pumping is a fairly steep interface. The ocean waves will determine what that is. So you have to pump enough sand up here that it can fill up the bottom and create a new bottom slope and interference with wave activity, which is a fundamental part of it. So the beach, in my world, goes from about 25 foot of depth all the way to the backside of the dune. That's the beach. That's what's designed. There is additional sand put in place, so there's what's called equilibration over the first maybe 6 to 12 months. We'll see after 6 to 12 months a rapid loss of some of that outer sand. It will adjust to a new profile. We have to endure 3 years of average erosion to get to the maintenance cycle. And we're always maintaining that outer edge. Averages are interesting. Averages are averages. There are years that are way above the average. There are years that are way below the average. And in case of beaches, it's the same thing. You can have a Hurricane Gloria on top of a beach nourishment a year and a half, and you've lost more sand than you thought you would in that 3-year average period. So we're constantly monitoring. We measure the beach all the way out to about a minus 20, minus 25-foot depth. We look at how fast material is losing. We look at the quality of the dune. We look at all those factors and determine how much sand should be put back in the next time it's renourished or maintained. It's kind of like buying a car and not expecting your tires to last the entire life of your car. The tires are to me, I've always used tires on a car as an example of the kind of frictional interface that exists with a car. You can get a 50,000-mile car of tire. Now, if you're, little old granny who drives to the church only on Sundays, that tire might last you 6 years, 7 years. If you're the Encyclopedia Britannica salesperson that's going up the entire eastern seaboard, every 6 months you're getting new tires. It's not a time frame. It's durability under stress. And we look at the stress over a 3-year period of time. How much have we had? How much are we going to endure? How much resistance should we have the next one? And storms tend to be trendy. If you have the right atmospheric condition and you have the right setup, like this year versus last year, we're under a drought last year. Now we're getting too much rain. It's a trend right now to have more rain. Same thing with nor'easters. We can get nor'easters 3 or 4 or 5 in a winter and go 3 winters without anything. So trying to budget this on a federal and state level is very difficult. You're throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping that the average is going to exist. When it doesn't, we have a luxury, or we have an imperiled position. We are more vulnerable than we should be. There's a lot of engineering that goes into these. There's constant monitoring, and there's adjustment of the engineering. We learned the models that are made in 2000 and in the late 1990s that would project what the beach would do in Rehoboth Beach in 2005 when we put it, were verified by the actual sand movement. So the engineers of the Corps, who I used to work with quite closely, and actually still do, they're constantly looking at the monitoring. DENREC measures the beaches every year, twice a year, and comes up with a solution and tells the Corps of Engineers, here's what we've got for sand all the way out to minus 30. And they get an idea of the kind of storminess, and so they've adjusted the profile over time. Do you want me to get into the funding at this point, or you want to hold that?
No, I got that
All right.
next.
So that's kind of where we are. There's a lot of engineering and science that goes into these. You have to understand the basic geology. You have to model and embrace the energy and look at how the energy and the sand grain size, which is important, interact. We know, for those of you who are around, in 2005, the Corps of Engineers identified a borrow site that was very gravelly. We didn't know it from the core samples that were taken, but when it was finally pumped on the beach, it had a tremendous amount of gravel. And in my span of 38 years at DENREC, it was probably the most uncomfortable 3 years of my life. The press hated me, Rehoboth hated me, I was the face of DENREC, and everybody hated me. You get used to it. Lisa, you know what that's like. You get used to that stuff. They all hate you because you're standing up for we didn't know, the Corps didn't know, but I was the face of that problem. We got through it, and we predicted it would disperse over time, it would move down the beach, and it did. And we never went back to that bar. So we were more careful. The Corps was more careful by identifying good quality sand throughout the entire borrow site. So we've learned our lesson on that. And that's really kind of fundamentally where we are. It's very good science. It's constantly being monitored. It's constantly evolving. It's always changing. And we're looking at, as conditions change, any tweaks to the design we need to do. So I'll turn it back over to you.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Well, let's segue into how is beach nourishment funded when federal funds are used. For me, what I've learned is it's a two-step process that has to do with agreements and appropriations. Agreements, I kind of liken that to a contract, and appropriations, I liken it to committing funds. So number one of the two-step process, State of Delaware and the Army Corps of Engineers has a 50-year partnership agreement in place for Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach, starting in 2003. The second step, once you have the contract, that's good. Second step is you need to have funds appropriated. And what this means is the funds have to be appropriated, as I understand, Tony, each year or each project. We're not guaranteed an appropriation for the entire 50-year agreement. We have to keep coming back at a bite of the apple each time. And unfortunately, that can be a battle for funding, even though the agreement is in hand right now through 2053. Cost share is established in the agreement. Until recently, the cost share was the feds paid 65% of the nourishment total, and the non-federal portion, therefore, was 35%. And that's changed. We'll tell you about that in a minute. But I used to attend what Tony referred to as American Shore Beach Preservation Association conferences in Washington, D.C. And this situation of needing to dredge is a nationwide thing. It happens, on the Mississippi and mid-country and the Pacific coast. So it's not just on our East Coast here. But one of the things I learned and found out is that we're very lucky to have a federal agreement. Because a lot of the beach town leaders I met at the ASBPA conferences are not so lucky. They're without federal agreements, thus they receive no federal funding. And so they have to self-fund, such as through chambers of commerce, accommodations taxes, sales taxes, beach tags, county funding, and other mechanisms. So again, I think we're very lucky to have this agreement. And the hard gamble is, are we going to get appropriations each year? Tony, if you would, you can comment on that, but then if you would segue into WRDA and explain what WRDA means and what its impact is on us, and how it impacts the federal non-fair cost of nourishment projects, especially in the Rehoboth Dewey project area.
Certainly. So the WRDA, as Stan referring to, is the Water Resources Development Act. You can imagine the Corps of Engineers with the many things that it does nationwide. And it's not just beach nourishment, it's all the ports and harbors, it's water control, it's flooding control, it's any myriad of water-related issues throughout the entire country. And members of Congress, of course, have their particular needs and desires. And so it's called a biennial act. It's every 2 years, the Water Resources Development Act is generated that provides policy and authorizations for projects. That's the key thing. It's followed later by budget, and that's very important. I had the privilege of meeting Lisa many years ago, and she was a Senate staffer, and we talked together. We locked arms and stood up for Delaware and its needs with the Corps of Engineers and making sure the Corps of Engineers was doing right by Delaware. Over the course of many times between Senator Biden, Senator Carper, Senator Coons, others, but most notably and recently, Senator Carper, who ended up chairing the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate, that was a very critical position to be in. And so the senator, who had served in Congress for so many years, was honored by his constituents in that committee, both sides of the aisle, and had the last Water Resources Development Act named after him. And he did some very notable things going out the door with that. Most notably for you all is that he changed the Corps of Engineers cost-sharing ratios from 65-35 for South Bethany, Bethany, Dewey, Rehoboth, and Lewis to a 80-20, 80% federal, 20% local. Fenwick went from 50-50. Different story there because of the Clinton administration. They put a rule in place that required a 50% match locally. That went from 50-50 to 80-20 as well. And so now the state of Delaware has been the cost-sharing partner for decades, for as long as I've been there, and it really was something that generated after the '62 storm, when there was a study done and eventually a plan done the study was called Operation 5 High, if the 5 high tides, and generating out of the '62 storm recovery report was generated a plan for the entire 25 miles of Delaware's ocean coast. and the state of Delaware was going to pick up the tab on that. That is historically where that was anchored. That's where that all started, and it's never really been questioned again. But the state has come forward with two sources of income. Number one is the bond bill, and the Beach Preservation Act of 1972 stipulates that, number one, DNREC is the sole authority for taking care of all the beaches of the state. Very plain language. Secondarily, it sets up a beach preservation fund at that $1972 of $1 million a year, but flexible to address the need. The second part is 1% of the accommodations tax that goes forward. That when I left DNREC, it was generating about $3 to $4 million a year. I noticed in this year's bond bill for shoreline and waterway projects, $10 million was put in place in the bond bill for this year that would go to beaches and to also waterways around the state that have to be dredged. So that's where historically we've been able to come up with some money to match the federal. There's been a series of attempts over the years, going back to Mike Castle and the Beach 2000 report, talking about should it be a cost shared in a different way. There's never been any thorough and final decision made on that. Right now, and I will say this and underscore it, despite the authorization and the wonderful cost sharing, the 2025 work plan for the Corps of Engineers did not include any sand placement in the country. It's also apparently, from what I'm hearing in the hallways that I get to visit verbally with friends, that 2026 is looking no better under the Trump administration. That there's probably going to be no money coming forward out of the administration, out of the president's office on beach nourishment in the nation. This becomes worrisome because you're supposed to be nourished every 3 years to maintain. If that picture is the ideal, you watch that berm diminish, and a storm that nearly needs about 125 feet of dry sand to be eroded during a storm. If there's only 75 or 50, the dune starts to go. And when the dune starts to go with no nourishment, it gets in there more rapidly every time. So we are not, I wouldn't say we're in crisis mode, but we are looking at crisis mode. The world we have known since the early 2000s, 25 years of it, 20 years of it, is a little bit upside down right now. And we don't know where it's going to end. We don't know what is going to be the position of the federal government. We don't know what's going to be the position. I saw the president this morning who had been saying he was going to end FEMA, saying this morning in Texas, and the horrible tragedy that's there. FEMA's doing a good job. We're going to talk about FEMA later. There are things that are evolving. It's not give up the ship at this point, but I think we have to be close attention. We have a very strong delegation in the two senators and the congresswoman, and we have the good voices there, but they are in the minority. They don't have the strength of committee support because of the votes that they get. So I'm just going to raise those questions now. I thought we have it on the agenda, but I think it fits into this discussion right now.
You jumped ahead with the
know.
doom and gloom story, but that's all right. There's still an optimism here.
I warned Stan, I'm very impromptu. He's very scripted, and I'm not, so you get what you get.
So I do have a little optimism that we're going to be able to continue. So what I'd like to share next is this 210-page report. It's actually got a link in the agenda, and it's called the Delaware Economic Analysis for Shoreline Management by Industrial Economics. It's DNREC's work group product examining alternative beach nourishment funding sources, including cost sharing of non-federal portion between state and municipalities and counties which receive nourishments. I wanted to give some background first. The previous administration and DNREC's leadership feared funding for beach nourishment, that it might become unsustainable with historic state funding mechanisms. There were several factors that they said contributed to their concern, including rising costs to take on nourishment projects, and by increasing frequency of storms, which result in storm damage, and thus the need for more frequent nourishments. I don't doubt any of that. The big question is, where would the additional funding come from if indeed it is needed, who pays and how much. And so because of this anticipated future shortfall in funds for beach nourishment projects in Delaware, DENREC formed a work study group to analyze where additional funding might come from other than from the state. Whereas before, the non-federal cost share was paid for solely by the state, DENREC is now proposing, as a result of this study, to split the costs of beach nourishment projects, with DENREC paying a lesser amount of the non-federal share, with the balance of the non-federal share paid for by the local municipalities and counties. So I'd like to turn it over if you can maybe give additional explanation of it, and how they got to some of their things. Now, let me share real quick, put a slide in that I didn't show you. This is from the report. It's really merely to show you that Rehoboth, the Atlantic Ocean beaches are joint projects, I guess not for Fenwick Island, but down here, the study had to do with Bethany and South Bethany combined. And then up in number 9 here is Rehoboth Beach and Dewey Beach. We're kind of, I guess, grouped together as one project because we're always done simultaneously, right? So whatever you'd like to share on this 211-page story.
Yeah, so let me just add, I'm not trying to, I'm trying to establish a little bit of credibility on this. Because I've been a geologist by training, I've worked with engineering and everything else. One of the things that happened to me over the years is I was, had the opportunity to serve on 2 National Academies of Science committees, a Heinz Center committee on coastal hazards. I was an adjunct professor at the old College of Marine Studies, then it was the CEO of the College of Earth, Oceans, and Environment in marine policy, and I got stuck with the economists, of all things. And I sat in many theses and dissertations. I oversaw 3 economic valuation studies done in DENREC. In the National Science, in the Beach Nourishment book that I helped co-author for the National Academy of Science, we had an economist on staff, and I learned a lot about economics, and I learned about valuation. And one of the things that I found kind of concerning in the last study that was done, and by the way, that was the study that Stan is referring to, this new administration, this new secretary has not mentioned it in my presence since being sworn in January. And I don't know where it will go, I don't know what it'll do, but it was focused on a presumed outcome, in my mind, just sharing my thoughts. It was determined pre-study that there should be a cost share distribution, and we're going to find the data that is going to support that distribution. I didn't think it was exactly a fair valuation as to what the general welfare of the state receives from that study, out of that study, the data resolved. One of the big questions, if you think about the color slide, or the slide that was put up, showing that Memorial Day of 2005. I'm going to just use Rehoboth singularly as an example. 2005, 20 years ago, 10 to 12 feet at best of dry sand going into that weekend. Put on top of that what we know to be the 3 to 4 to possibly 5 feet of erosion per year. Without nourishment, what would Rehoboth look like today? I'll stretch my imagination and tell you, your boardwalk is gone. The front row of structures are either heavily damaged, certainly unusable, and trying to figure out what we do with them. That's Rehoboth. Put that into Dewey Beach, Bethany Beach, South Bethany, Fenwick, Lewis, and on. And we never counted that cost of, it's called cost avoidance. What did we avoid in all the dollars we spent, the hundreds of millions of dollars, with the Corps of Engineers at 65-35, now 80-20, how much cost to the state of Delaware was avoided by that? Fundamental piece, never counted. The distribution of sand, we put sand at 3 different project area sites: Fenwick Island, Bethany, South Bethany, and Dewey and Rehoboth. And I'm going to tell you, you have to take my word for it as a practitioner for 38 years. Cape Henlopen in front of the bathhouse has more sand than it had 35 years ago. All the state parks, which had bathhouses and walkways which were in jeopardy, are protected because of the distribution over 25 miles. That value gained out of all that sand placement was never really critically included. So some major points that we didn't capture in that would have told a better story, would have informed decision-making a little bit better than it did. Where DNREC decides to go with that study, we have to wait and see. I don't think it was the study, the quintessential study. On the other hand, we have the other coastal study done by the University of Delaware that has really fabulous numbers about the value, but it's the entire coast. It's not just the beach. It's the back bays. It's all the other things that go with the stimulated economy. And one of the things that we have to put in mind is that a high-quality beach attraction that certainly Rehoboth Beach understands as best as anybody. You understand you have it in your name, for God's sakes. I mean, you're not Rehoboth Town, you're not Rehoboth City, you're Rehoboth Beach. Because the Camp Meeting Association said, we want to be at the beach. That old picture from the late 1800s, Atlantic Avenue, there was no dune because they put a road on top of the dune and called it Atlantic Avenue, and that's where the boardwalk went later on. I'm waxing on this a little bit, but bear with me while I just say that it is the pivotal economic driver along the coast here is the quality of that. And what that brings is a number of things. Think about the extension in the economy of Sussex County and to a lesser degree, but still important, Kent County. People come here to work because there's a quality beach. You can work in restaurants, you can work in hotels, you can work on the beach, you can do any number of things. That begins to stimulate the economy. There's a need for people vacation here, like crazy. You know what the weekend was like. Your grocery stores are serving those beach-related activities. People who work here, people who come visit here. They produce all sorts of jobs with younger people. There's an aging, graying environment that is here, which requires a lot more health care. Our healthcare industry is exploding around here because it's an attractive place to retire to. That brings practitioners, all sorts of practitioners. A lot of those practitioners are younger. The schools are growing because of this. It all kind of starts with what's attracting people here. And I will pick on a little crossroad in middle of Sussex County, Shaftocks Corner, which is out by Gumboro. Why aren't they at Shaftocks Corner? Those are still the cornfields that I remember from 40 years ago. Why aren't they there and why are they here? Why is Sussex County seeing so much explosion from the coast inward? It's because of the water and the sand environment. So when we really calculate what that is providing in value, not just the pie chart of the dollar, but the value, I think about my friends who leave Baltimore and Washington on a Saturday morning and have to go through there was a 16-mile backup to the Bay Bridge yesterday. That's a measurement of value. That is, if you're willing to put up with that, and you know that's coming, you're still going to come here. You got to be here. You got to be at the sea. And I don't care if it's 16-mile backup going home. That's a measurement of value. And we need to understand those values full well when we begin to talk about how do we protect the resource that's creating the fundamental part of that economy. So I'm getting off track here, but I think we have to look hard at the future. We're at a pivot point. I was working at DNREC in 2005 when we did this work. I worked in there until 2017, I think it was, 2018, something like that. And I came to Rehoboth Commissioners, I came to Dewey Beach, I went to Fenwick, I went to Bethany, I went to South Bethany. I said, prior to 2005 when it started here, there wasn't a commissioner. You remember this, there was not a commissioner that didn't run for this and said, what's your number one issue? It's beach erosion, what are we going to do? And now, what are we running for? It's how big is the flagpole going to be? We got a crack in the sidewalk. It's all those luxuries we don't have to worry about anymore. But you have to worry about the beach. You have to. This is where I'm lecturing you, but you have to don't give up on the beach. It's really what's your critical lifeblood. And it's at a very, very tenuous position right now. How's that, Stan? Totally unscripted, and I just went off.
Pretty good. That's pretty good. So, I don't know where you're headed next, but I guess I wanted to remind everybody that this is a proposal only. It's something that I wanted everybody to be having awareness of so that we could be reactive to it. As far as how each, well, here's some monies here. This is the proposal in the study, that the cost share currently paid of the 100% of the 20% paid by the non-federal, by the state, is now, the local share would be 53%. That's Rehoboth Beach / Dewey Beach, because remember, it's a joint project. Now they've added in a proposal for the county to pay 31%, and then the state is reduced to 16%. And just in doing rough numbers and looking at the last beach replenishment, just very rough numbers, it looks like this could add potentially $1 million to the Rehoboth budget to be able to do this. Now, that's combined with Dewey Beach, so we'd have to fight with Dewey Beach over what the percentage is, I'm sure. We have the town manager of Dewey here, so he's chuckling with me. But this is serious business, to come up with $1 million a year. I know that the plan is to, the current agreement is that every 3 years they come out. But in looking back at the figures, it looks like nourishments were done more regularly every 2.5 years or so. So again, if we have to divide that $1 million into 1, 2, or 2.5 years, that's still a significant amount of money. Now, this study has not mentioned at all about how each jurisdiction is to raise funds to pay for their proposed share of beach nourishment. That's left to each jurisdiction. So some of the talk about around the coastal towns was, well, if this happened, how would we pay for it? I feel for all these other, Rehoboth doesn't have deep pockets, but neither certainly does Fenwick or Dewey Beach. Dewey Beach, who has no property tax. How are they going to pay for this? And the one thought that was bandied around would be beach tags as a possibility. But again, none of the beach towns have deep pockets. So that's a concern. And I wanted to share with you that as mayor, I have responded against this proposal, and I will continue to respond against the proposal that I believe the full non-federal share, which is now gone from 35% to 20%, ought to be paid for by the state. And you're right, I talked with Secretary Denwick last week, and he says this is quiet now, but I don't know that means it's put to bed forever. So I think we have to be attentive. And I wanted you all commissioners, as well as the public, to be aware that if this economic study moves forward, that I will be reactive and I will have the response that I told you I would have. And I would be most likely joining other coastal town mayors to address the proposal, which again is cost sharing, not just with the state, but with the county and ourselves. Interestingly, the cost share up on the screen are for the Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach project. And 53%, that's over half of the non-federal share, would have to be paid by Rehoboth if this were to be approved. Interestingly, Bethany or South Bethany, their cost share would be 71%, and Fenwick Island 68%. And so this is, you can imagine all the coastal towns are going to be gathering together and coming out with further discussion of this, if it comes forward. Again, right now it's not, but again, I felt obligated to give you all an awareness of all this. Would you like to add anything else to conclude this?
No, I think my concern as a practitioner has been expressed, and I look forward to seeing what this administration does. We have another secretary. I have spoken with Secretary Patterson about this, and like, as you reflected, Stan, in your discussion, it's quiet for now. I know Senator Huxtable asked Secretary Patterson, Secretary nominated Patterson at the time, in the confirmation hearing about that study. And Secretary Patterson's response was along the lines of, we need to look at a robust valuation. I can't remember his exact words, but fundamentally he was not saying we're going to proceed with this, but he also didn't say they weren't. But he was looking forward to a complete evaluation as what the coast provides. I think overshadowing everything at this juncture is concern about federal funding into the future. And I think we all ought to be very aware of what that can mean. We can see, I'll give you an example. Broadkill Beach was built under main channel deepening, went from a channel of the Delaware Bay Channel going up 40 feet to 45 feet, put a very robust dune and beach in place. And at the midsection of town where the most erosion occurs for a variety of reasons, there's about a 12-foot drop-off of the middle of the dune. You can't get to the beach because the whole beach has disappeared. The dune keeps every storm. It hits at the base, erodes the bottom couple of feet, and the top just falls down into a vertical escarpment. And they can't get on the beach. There's really no practical way. So now the Corps is proposing moving the entire dune back in a future nourishment. So it's the same to watch these things get built. The very first nourishment in Rehoboth Beach and Dewey Beach was 2005, and we've been able to maintain those dimensions pretty well over all that period of time, 20 years. I'd hate to see it begin to deteriorate, which means bigger projects, more costly projects. Maintenance is critical. Don't let maintenance go by.
Thank you, Tony. With that, we'll move to the next topic, which is this seaside to statewide. I think you were headed that way a little while ago. This is totally your topic, so don't go away.
Oh, man.
If you can tell us some of the highlights. This is a 42-page report. The link is embedded in the agenda. And it's really all about the contribution of the coastal economy to the entire state, that coastal economy doesn't just contribute to local economy, but statewide.
So there was a box. I failed to bring the studies themselves, but if you get a chance to look at this study, it's online. We can give a reference. I think in the follow-up you can put on your website a link to this. There was a box in there that had key findings, and I'm just going to be very boring for a minute and read from this just for a second. Is as of 2022, the direct contribution of Delaware's coastal activities. Now, this is more than just the beach, it's everything. We can all kind of figure out what we think is how much is actual direct ocean beach related. But 2022, direct contributions, 74,030 jobs, $4.1 billion in labor income, $7.6 billion in value added. This is direct contribution to Delaware's coastal activities. $14.2 billion in industrial output. When indirect, okay, this is where you get into valuation. When indirect, that's kind of the pie chart of money generated or money moving around. When indirect and induced activities are considered, coastal activity support above and beyond what we just said, 104,540 jobs, $6.5 billion in labor income, $10.4 billion in value added, and $22.5 billion in industrial output. $3.3 billion in local, state, and federal taxes generated. $3.3 billion in local, state, and federal taxes generated. $3.3 billion. I'm going to say that again because we're looking at spending $20 million to restore the beaches, to protect $3.3 billion in taxation.
Thank you. We're around the corner here. We've got three more topics. One is a status of beach nourishment in Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach. You hinted about that. I just wanted to share that January 15th this year, Taylor and I walked the beach with Army Corps representatives and Denrec, and that was probably the coldest day of the year. We, Bill Zolper, the town manager, the Dewey was there. We froze, didn't we? But it was worth enduring because we were headed toward a fall nourishment, and that's what we were confirming. Unfortunately, as you heard, and I verified also, Tony, I talked with Secretary Patterson last week, and he confirmed that he had talked with DENREC or the Army Corps, and it just was not going to happen this year. So unfortunately, we are okay-ish, but we're just one storm away from being in dire trouble. So hopefully things will turn around. With that, you kind of gave a hint. Is there any further comment you'd want to make on that or future nourishments nationwide, Delaware?
I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yep.
It's a concern.
Okay. And then if you would just give a little 2-minute spiel on American Shore Beach Preservation Association. I think the city has been a member of that for a decade and a half, maybe, ever since I came on as a commissioner. I used to attend conferences. Now we don't have anybody going there, but we always felt good that our own Tony Pratt was the president of ASBPA. Do you want to make a spiel for that?
Sure. ASBPA, I mentioned very early on, ASBPA was an organization founded by Corps of Engineers retirees in the 1920s. It was founded in New Jersey, incorporated there. It is a nationwide. Current president of ASBPA is from LA County, Los Angeles County, California. The current executive director is in Folly Beach, North Carolina. ASBPA, as we call it, has been instrumental in promoting science and engineering and advocating for application of the best science and engineering in solutions for beach erosion across the nation. Pacific Coast, Gulf Coast, Atlantic Seaboard Coast, and Great Lakes are all included within the purview of ASBPA. I'm happy that Rehoboth has been a member for a number of years. There is a strong need for advocacy right now, obviously, with not only investigations and furtherance of the knowledge of beach erosion. It's still a developing science. The models that are used to project how there will be a land-water interface and how quickly stuff erodes. It was mentioned, Stan, you mentioned that if you look at the 3-year cycle of renourishment, sometimes it's more like 2.5. I talked about the variability of particular storms. We have sand loss. Cape Henlopen is accumulating something in the order of 200 to 250,000 cubic yards of sand a year at the tip of it. You know, are there ways we could ever recycle sand? Could we take sand that we put on the beach here and trap it and put it back at the south end? Dewey Beach feeds Rehoboth Beach. South Bethany feeds Bethany. Fenwick feeds the state park. They all feed state parks. That literal transport, that conveyor belt of sand moving on the coast from Fenwick Island all the way to the tip of Cape Henlopen is something we don't look at very well. Prior to nourishment, we don't know what where the sand actually ever came from. We have theories, but before we started nourishing in 2005, significant nourishment, there was always sand on the beach. There has been for tens of thousands of years, and we don't really actually know the interchange between where that sand is coming from, how it's feeding into the beach, and how you can do what would be ideally a sediment budget that would account for every sand grain. And so there's room for investigation and improvement there. And I think that you know, where we sit with the de-emphasis of some of these understandings and then the funding for it is we're at a critical point right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to questions and answers. Questions from the commissioners up here. And then we'll have a very short recess, and then we'll go to the members of the public. Anybody? Commissioner Gossett?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We talked about this cost share for the local aspect, but Mr. Pratt, thank you for all your information and the history you provided. So there really is no strong feeling that that 80% federal funding is going to be there for the next couple of years. Is that what I hear you saying?
That's the concern. We'll have to wait and see. There's a couple of significant things. We have a midterm election coming up next November. Don't know what happened to Congress, but right now, there seems to be a grand amount of support in House and Senate to whatever the presidential office is producing in budget, and so far, their budgets that I have seen and been privileged to, and people who've been looking at it, they have what they call a work plan they develop, and they do not include beach nourishment this year. And the inside skeptical, I'll say that again for emphasis, inside skeptical outlook is that there would not be an expectation for 3 years of federal funding for beach nourishment nationwide. So if Rehoboth is up against Miami Beach or Atlantic City, I don't think Rehoboth's going to win. So we have to think about, if it's there, is it enough to address everything? Who wins, who loses, who are the winners, who are the losers? And I throw it in the air and see what comes down.
We should be conscious of working on the 20% mix, if you will, Mayor, is that correct? But even if we come up with an equitable solution or formula for that 20%, 20% is not going to match at all the 80% that's needed from federal funding. So we could not proceed at all. Would that be the correct?
Could I throw in one other whammy in there? There is required, and Sam mentioned it, we did it in 2003 under Ruth Ann Minner. We did what's called a project partnership agreement. It's a 50-year agreement. That stipulates a 65-35 cost share, with WRDA changing it to 80-20. New PPAs, as they're called, have to be done. I would be reminding your congressional representatives that a PPA, push for the PPA, and remind Secretary Patterson that a PPA is needed, and that's a starting point. You can't do anything without that.
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Good?
Thank you for the presentation, but I hope going forward, this sort of presentation will be contracted for by Lewis, Rehoboth, Dewey, Bethany, South Bethany, potentially with Fenwick as well, because there's a larger entity than Rehoboth Beach, not just because of the way we're sort of paired with Dewey. 2 questions. At the moment, Denrick receives that about 12% or 1/8 of the 8% accommodations tax. Is there some wiggle room because we have more hotels have come online, plus the occupancy rate has grown higher and higher, since 2003 when these agreements were reached. So do you see that as a possibility of raising that, say, from its current 12.5% of that accommodations tax flowing to Denrick for use in beach replenishment to, say, 25%, like doubling it?
It's certainly a question that could be asked. When I left 7, 8 years ago, surprisingly, most of the revenue in the accommodations tax statewide came out of Newcastle County. And it was being, 1% was dedicated to tourism statewide, 1% is dedicated to beach preservation. The rest of it pretty much goes to the General Assembly. But I don't know what the numbers are today, but it's certainly worth looking at and legitimately asking the question of your representatives in the General Assembly.
And my other, question is, because this is not consistent with what I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal about priorities of this administration or just of the electorate right now. We have a fixed supply of shoreline, both on the west and east coast. So you're making dire predictions about what you've heard on Capitol Hill. It doesn't gel with what a lot of the media is reporting, because there's, I don't know. I think we don't want to, fearmonger on this issue when you may be hearing exaggerated, rumors about how all of a sudden, President Trump doesn't want to protect our nation's beaches, which I think is a fiction, actually. And I'm very concerned that we're going to dwell on this At the moment, it's more critical to me to make sure that the DENREC portion, which we have more control over, is protected than to assume, the sky's going to fall and the federal government's going to, pull this out from under us.
Yeah,
That's certainly the commissioner's choice, is not mine.
well, you can just receive that as a comment and not a question.
Mayor, if I could, please.
Anybody else? Commissioner Thier?
Yeah, so a few questions. So last replenishment here was 2023?
I think that's right, yeah.
Okay. What was and when we replenished in 2023, we didn't do the entire beach here. We did we did the north end, from Henlopen down to, I don't know if anyone can remember, it wasn't past Rehoboth Avenue.
Close
Maybe
to
it was-
Rehoboth.
Yeah, maybe it was the Beach Patrol Station. Do you remember? Baltimore, okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So my first question is, what was the cost of just that section alone?
I don't keep up with that. I don't know what those
Do you
numbers
know what the cost of just that
I
section
can
was alone?
get you,
Do we know the total cost of, it sounds like
I gave you
Rehoboth
that-
and
Can I give you
Dewey?
that spreadsheet? Did you bring that? I didn't bring it with me, like the Corps gave me. 2023 should be in there.
the Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach was 10.9 million, 10.9 million.
For the two, yeah, the whole
Total.
project cost.
Just kind of following up on that. What was what's been the expectation? Every 3 years, we're going to get replenished next year? Was that the expectation?
If we need the sand.
Okay.
So it's not an automatic. Of course, you got to have the money appropriated, but if you need the sand. And when the first year that we ever had them come out and measure, I always thought that Dewey got replenished after the very first one ever, and that we didn't because we didn't need it. Does that ring a bell?
I don't recall.
Yeah,
2005, March 10th, I don't know why I remember that. March 10th was the first day of pumping in Dewey. And they pumped for one day and then they had to go. They had to leave. They broke a pipe. And I was like, my life just ended. But that's why I remember that. But I don't recall that sand. I know that Dewey Beach tends to be, because of the initial construction, there's so much sand that goes out and fills up, that there's a tremendous equilibration back to sort of a straight shoreline all the way through. And typically it goes from south to north. So I would guess that Rehoboth was fed pretty adequately and Dewey Beach collapsed pretty rapidly. That would be a practitioner's guess.
So follow up on the question, if we need the sand, who determines if we need the sand and when would they be determining that?
Corps of Engineers. DENREC does a survey twice a year, winter deflated, what's called a deflated profile, winter inflated profile. The berm, the dry berm, tends to get much wider in the summer and collapses the dune, the beach bar system. And in the winter, you have a lot more sand in the underwater section. So the full volume is measured twice a year, and that's handed over to the Corps. They determine. Now, they're on a automatic schedule looking every 3 years. It's on their charts, and they will look at the actual measurements and determine, is it sufficient? Because part of the contracting part of the nourishment is to get a dredge on site and begin to pump with all the pipeline and moving everybody here and all the equipment. It's called a mobilization cost, and those are pretty high, in the millions of dollars. And if you were going to mobilize and put a small bit of sand on, you kind of look at the ratios and say, maybe we could wait a year and suck up that mobilization cost, and they could charge you on the exit too. They charge you to break down. So you got a mob and demob, and then you got a sand volume cost. And so in order to do that efficiently, they say, how much sand are we going to put on? Once we put $5 million of mobilization, we're going to put $2 million of sand. Maybe we wait a year or two. So they'll make those economic decisions.
So based on the data they've collected so far, I guess talking from like an average perspective, do you think they'd be saying, hey, we need to do it next year, or we don't?
Context is everything. If the North Atlantic Division and Philadelphia District, which also North Atlantic Division includes Baltimore and Norfolk and New York and up to Boston, they're looking at total needs. They're going to look at, all the jobs in New Jersey and all the jobs in New Jersey. Philadelphia district does half of New Jersey up to Manasquan Inlet, and all of us, and then Baltimore district's doing Ocean City, Maryland. They're going to kind of look at where they've got, so as context, it's not isolated, what's Rehoboth need? They're going to say, what realistically we're going to get in budget, and how do we distribute that within North Atlantic Division, Philadelphia district? So that's, I don't know where those discussion points are, but that's typically how they evaluate who's got the biggest need.
Commissioner Thea, are you trying to get at, will we need nourishment next year? If they were skipping this year, I would say it's a good bet that we're going to need it in subsequent years.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's pretty clear of all of us that walk the boardwalk, there are different needs even just within Rehoboth Beach, right? When I walk to the end of my street at the end of Laurel, right, the erosion there is significantly less than what happens, at the north end of the boardwalk. So and I guess this is probably something to think about, is particularly if we're going to end up having to shoulder this cost, what does that mean for Rehoboth, right? How do we, as Rehoboth Beach, approach this going forward? And it's a very intentionally, just a very open-ended question,
Sure.
right? I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that, this isn't just about Rehoboth Beach, which I didn't think it was, but it's not just about Delaware. It's about when the Corps makes a determination, it's based on what's going on, at least in the Mid-Atlantic. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's fair enough, and I think that within the your observations of Rehoboth are very notable, and let me go back. I started working in 1980 in Denmark, and I was to take over the regulatory program, and they weren't ready. We needed to have a hearing, so they found busy work for me. And my boss at the time said, why don't you figure out why the north end of Rehoboth seems to erode so much more rapidly than the south end? We're down at Stokely Street, for instance. We've got an abundance of beach, but up there, right there at Surf Avenue, there seems to be nothing there. I don't know what possessed me, but I got out an old map, and I extended the line of the boardwalk north and south, sort of, infinitely. And lo and behold, if you extended the straight line of the boardwalk south, it crosses Route 1 in the middle of Dewey Beach. Keep going straight. If you go north, just north of Deauville, it goes out in the ocean. Guess what? The boardwalk doesn't parallel the ocean or the beach. It pinches the north end. So observationally, we're closer. And beyond that is Surf Avenue, which I put a bunch of rocks in to protect the bulkhead, the steel sheeting bulkhead that's there. I put all those rocks that were in there. My boss handed me that job. He said, put a bunch of rocks in there and see what's going on. I don't know. But it's held up. But you have a pinch point there. It's really where infrastructure has impinged upon the natural flow of the beach. Ideally, you'd think, oh, well, we could put the sand right there and address that problem. But really, if you want to endure 3 years, you should be putting it further south, because that's where the conveyor belt is going to move that sand into position. That's the complexity what the Corps has to do. Surf Avenue, Randy Wise is the engineer for the Corps I work with very closely. We could not get Surf Avenue and that bulkhead to survive a dune for a solid almost 10 years. We had to get enough sand in the system and we finally are maintaining a dune out there. But it's always going to be a pinch point. But how do you address that pinch point? Do you put the sand right there? And what costs, $3 million to put $500,000 worth of sand? It doesn't make any sense. Do you put it way down at the south end? Do you put it in Dewey? I mean, those are the complexities of how do you feed that in a literal system, predicting, because literal system means longshore. Some days it's all moving south, and some days it's all moving north, the net. And so it's like you go like this, you're sloshing, and you're sloshing this way and getting north over time. What if this year it sloshes but it heads south? Well, then that sand that was supposed to get here didn't get here. The complexities and the nuances of nature. I love it, right? It's very complex and it's very dynamic. And you're trying to predict, try to predict the weather 10 days out. They can't do it very well. Predict storm waves the next 26, 34, whatever months. That's next to impossible. But they use the averages.
So you mentioned you're the one, I don't want to say you're the one, but you were part of At least you were involved in putting the rocks at the north end there.
At Surf Avenue, right on the seawall, yeah.
Has that had any effect on the beach erosion at all?
No, because what was happening was that steel sheeting that was put in by Del Dot after 62, that was getting flanked on the backside, and bulkheads and steel sheeting like that with concrete cap, they're only as good as all the material behind them. We were seeing it looping around and Surf Avenue collapsing. So I put an apron of rock around to dissipate wave energy, protect that, and also wrapped it up to the north a little bit. That was like 1988 or something like that. I think I did that. I was ill-equipped to do it, but I was my assignment.
So do you see any other options, to, again, we're kind of focusing on this north end of the boardwalk, other than putting sand there? Are there any other mitigation?
Not if you want to provide the amenity of a sandy beach as well. If you're solely dedicated to protecting infrastructure, then you walk away from beach nourishment. But if you want a beach and what it brings to the economy and the enjoyment of people and why people are here, then nourishment's always the answer.
Yeah, and, I understand all that first part, right? Why we have the beach. The question was really just specific. Right now, we bring sand in, right? That's our approach. We bring in more sand. Are there any other options that we could consider, even if it's just provides mitigation so that instead of every 2 or 3 years we need to do it, it becomes every 4, 5, 6, 7 years?
In my experience, and with my opinion, no. I think what's being done is the most efficient and effective way to treat that problem right there at Surf Avenue on the north end of the boardwalk. We've got ahead of it. We are maintaining and doing there. What's critical is maintaining rather than letting it deplete and then building it all back out again. But again, I mentioned earlier that the engineering and the engineer I work with, the Corps, is still there. He and I talk on occasion. And the understanding, you have a model that predicts the behavior of sand underwater influence. And then
So just to kind of jump to my next question, which is, so today what we do is we, pump sand in from a boat, essentially. So is there another option for replenishing, and as you mentioned, one of the challenges with pumping sand in from a boat, or let's just say the approach that we use today, there's significant mobilization costs, right? Millions of dollars. It sounds like it almost costs more to mobilize than it does to actually put the sand on the beach itself. And again,
yeah.
Not an important question, not a question, just kind of a statement. So are there other approaches that we could be using to replenish that north end of the beach or other sections of that north end of the beach?
No, the quantity is the quantity that you need to effectively address the problem and get your at least 3 years in. With the sand quality, quality is important. We put gravel on that beach and it was horrible. It was dangerous. It was very.
I remember it.
Remember
So
that,
so
yeah.
go ahead.
We don't go there. And if you go really fine sand, it doesn't last. It doesn't have the same durability. So a lot of effort is made to look at the native granularity and match that by offshore sources. There's no efficient way to truck in sand. One of the things about trucking sand, and we do it on the Bay Beaches, nobody calculates the destruction of roads. When you have 300, 400, 500 trucks going into Bowers Beach on their roads, Del Dot's handed a big fee. It's a mobilization cost, if you will. The quantity of sand that's needed on an ocean project for durability, time durability, there's really only one way to get it there, and that's an ocean going to edge. They can find that sand. The sand you're getting is halfway down to the inlet or more. And it fills up a hopper, it comes to shore, and it offloads. It's not like it's right there and it just pumps it directly onto the beach. But that's what we're kind of stuck with, but it is the most efficient and effective, mostly effective way to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gossett?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You mentioned earlier the phrase cost avoidance, and that's being prepared and maintenance, et cetera. In your experience, carrying that over to preserving or to maintaining infrastructure here in the city, have you experienced any other communities, either locally or nationwide or worldwide for that matter, that have had an impact or made changes to their existing building codes or infrastructure codes that would, looking at perhaps not maintenance, maintain the beach for X number of years, that would have an impact on the infrastructure of the city and preparing for future builds of cost avoidance in preparation of more stringent building codes, such as they've done with hurricanes in Florida and that type of thing. Have you had any experience with that or thoughts about that?
Not directly on beaches. There's a much broader concern about disaster management, disaster recovery. You know, Hurricane Andrew, and I was on a Heinz Center panel many years ago. We put together a book that's called The True Cost of Coastal Hazard. Andrew was the hurricane of design that we looked at. And you get into, just for a second, you get into, it's after Sandy, it's after Hugo, it's after any of the Gulf storms, like any of them. You not only do you have the infrastructure losses, you have recovery costs immediately, rebuilding costs, infrastructure rebuilding costs. But what we never calculate, and this is critically important, is we never talk about the human cost, not just lives lost, but what it does to society. There have been several studies done post-storm recovery. Katrina was one. What happens in Lower Ninth Ward? What happens in Aiken, Texas? You know, what happens is the society, we see major upticks in horrible things: suicide rates, spousal abuse, child abuse, alcoholism, drug use, suicide. I mean, across the board, that kind of stressor within a community, and that's something you have to avoid holistically as much as you can. We saw it after Sandy up in northern New Jersey, the loss of jobs, the loss of homes, all that kind of stuff. There are two types of flooding, and you know, Bill suffers a different kind of flooding than you do. You don't have a bay behind you, which is really fortunate. It has to come through the ocean. It has to go through a headland in Rehoboth Beach. You have high land, which is very durable, and you know, it would be an escarpment and maybe sand overwashing, but it'll be an escarpment that translates toward the buildings over time. On the other hand, Dewey Beach will likely drown from the bayside. It will come up there. And so you have, and we saw this a lot in Sandy, for instance, in New Jersey. There's one thing about what's called velocity waters. When a wave goes through a dune and goes horizontal through a structure, it has a far greater damaging than on a bayside where water goes up and comes back down. It gets wet, it's got mildew, it's got all those problems, but it didn't horizontally push it. You don't have the back bay rise and fall in Rehoboth Beach. But what you do have over time, if we had gone back to 2005 and never found the money to do all that nourishment work over the years, you would see 3 to 4 feet. Let's just say it's been 20 years. You'd be 60 feet further in than you are right now. Where does that put you? You know, your saltwater taffy is literally in the salt water. You know, not to be glib about it, but that's kind of where it is. The front row is gone. We did look at that at one time with John Hughes, my boss many years ago, and the previous mayor. We did start looking at the real impacts. Not only do you, and it's episodic, you don't lose it like, oh gee, between Tuesday of May 5th and October we have a little incremental. It's that storm that comes and snaps it up and puts it, and where does it go? It goes into the ocean. Now you've got tort liabilities. You've got structures all over the place, and no one can go in the water. They can't go in the water in Dewey, they can't go in the water in Cape Henlopen, and they can't go in the water anywhere because half of Rehoboth is sitting in the ocean, and it's got nails. And we still see 62 storm debris occasionally. We saw that for a long time. So that's the problem. You have an escarpment that's going to go in and things are going to collapse in if it were all to be ignored. And that's the consequence overall. You have plenty of time to get out. You're not going to have people falling in probably, unless they really want to. But, you know, that would be the future. We can't stop it. And we see it getting close to you know, anybody's buildings, the brand new hotel is going to go up. You know, how are you going to support that? Well, water could flow underneath, but if nobody's in the rooms because there's no beach to go to, now what do we got? So these investments and these plans that are being made are dependent upon a nice recreational opportunity.
I'd like to go to members of the public. If you have any Bill, do you have anything you want to ask Tony?
I'd just say that thank you for having this, Mayor and Commissioners. Bill Zolper, Town Manager, Dewey Beach, thank you for having this, Mayor and Commissioners. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your presentation. For Dewey Beach, I was there in the '92 storm. Water came over the dune, met the bay, had to close Route 1. So closing Route 1 is a huge emergency issue for the folks that live in Bethany, South Bethany, and all the way down to Ocean City. So here in Rehoboth, you don't have to worry about that. You're not really in a 100-year floodplain. All of Dewey, from basically Houston Street down to Collins, the whole town is in a 100-year floodplain. So we have to worry about that all the time. And Route 1 runs right down the middle of it. So that's a huge concern for us in Dewey Beach. But thanks again, Mayor, for having this.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Carolyn, identify yourself in relationship to the city, please.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I guess this is kind of just an observation, I think. I think the part that I struggle with is, one, I don't want to see us ever have a beach tag, but I understand we might have to find a way to raise money. One of the key things that I kind of think about is, you know, as a Delaware resident, as a city resident, I pay taxes to the state of Delaware. So some of that tax revenue that goes to the state, I would like to see more of it be part of this. But we have non-resident property owners. So the state is not getting any benefit from their income taxes. And this would not be a popular thing. I don't know if you could ever do it legally, but to somehow have a way to get more from whether you could do it through property taxes or a fee or whatever, where there would be a different rate for your non-resident property owners to help pay for the beach replenishment because none of their income tax is going to the state. But those kind of things I think have to be looked at because there's a difference. Although I guess you would argue some of I happen to be surrounded by Maryland residents, and I guess some of theirs is probably going to Ocean City for beach replenishment there. But those are the things that I think about that I'd like to see the state do more because they're getting a benefit through the businesses paying state income taxes. I don't know. I think it is a very interesting problem to have, and I think we have to find a way. The other thing I will just mention, and I don't know that you would never do this unless your dune got wiped out, but I was just in the Outer Banks, and the section I was in, they use big, giant sandbags. Like, I'm going to guess they weigh tons. They're huge. But their dune is made out of sandbags and then covered with sand, which was interesting because I don't know that those sandbags would just float away. They're that large, but thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Francis? Timing.
Francis Kelleher, 318 Stokely Street. Two questions. One is a technical question and one is a money question, if you will. To follow up on Commissioner Thier, up at the north end, there is a groin, right, going out into the ocean there. And of course, there was that old theory or the old way of thinking was that was good and that helped protect and keep sand. And now I think the new school of thought is that actually, again, like don't mess with Mother Nature, and they actually don't help. And I wonder if, and I know up in Jersey where they have a lot in South Jersey, and I think they're talking about removing them. Would there be any thought that removing that would actually help the north end, or is it too late to mess with that?
I'm not the engineer.
Oh.
So, but you know, the groin emplacement, New Jersey was probably one of the first places, Ocean City, Maryland, Rehoboth Beach, Bethany Beach. We have them in Broadkill Beach.
And up
we have them in
I
Slaughter
think
Beach.
they're even up in Gordon Pond and Henloop, and aren't there some?
Yeah, there's some up there. And so they were put to interrupt literal transport, longshore movement of sand.
Yeah.
That's when Rehoboth was a very small community. North and south boundaries were pretty confined, so we just want to preserve this one area.
Yeah.
As the coast development proliferated and even the state parks, suddenly maintaining sand in a 1 mile strip is no longer what we wanted. We need to look at the holistic thing. So that's why it all changed. I don't think, the engineers, for the Corps of Engineers, have looked at the current groin emplacement, the degree to which they hold sand back, and they've designed around that, they've managed around that. So I think leaving it alone is probably okay at this point.
And Mayor, I appreciated your comments about that you would continue to challenge and be against that, and that you support the state should fund their full portion. In the state of Delaware's Beach Preservation Act, not only does it call out that absolutely DNREC is responsible for the entire coast of the Delaware Atlantic coast, but it also, as you mentioned, talks about the funding. And to me, it's clear that that act, that law, is that the state is responsible for the funding. There is nothing in there. I mean, you could kind of look at the words, but I would make the case that they would need to change the act in order to start forcing the municipalities to contribute. I guess I would just look to the city and hope that, yes, we would do everything, and all the other coastal places. And the other thing I know would also fight that, but the other thing the Delaware coastline is 25 miles. If they're talking about Rehoboth Beach, Dewey, well, that's like two miles, 2 out of 25. And I haven't read this big document that you referred to, but I will. The portion that they're talking about assigning to Dewey Rehoboth, is that basically like 2/25 of the cost of maintaining the whole 25 miles of the state stretch?
Yeah,
Like, are they doing it fairly?
I don't know
The exact, okay.
something I'll look into.
Stan, if I could just add
Tony, yes, sir.
one additional thought on reference about the Beach Preservation Act. It's a story from in the field, but it's worth repeating right now. Once upon a time, Rehoboth brought front-end loaders and cleared out the stormwater pipes that were a stub end at the edge of the boardwalk, and they were digging what would have been a building of a dune. Okay, and the pipes were covered with sand. On Stokely Street lived Henry Horsey, retired Supreme Court Justice. His neighbor just to the south was Maurice Hartnett, at the time a sitting Court of Chancery judge. And so my boss, John Hughes, said, well, you need to go talk to Henry and Mo about this stuff. And I brought a Deputy Attorney General along with me at the time, and she was not thrilled to be sitting there talking to a Supreme Court Justice and a sitting Court of Chancery Justice, who drilled into us plentifully that the Beach Preservation Act, there is no other interpretation other than DNREC is 100% responsible for all beaches of the state. And they just slammed it on us. And they said, Rehoboth can no way go out there and dig that sand out without a permit or DNREC doing it. And we came up with a compromise. But when you have a Supreme Court Justice and a Court of Chancery Justice telling us that the Beach Preservation Act is like so heavily dedicated to DNREC taking care of all the beaches. Jean Langdon was my DAG at the time, and she said, why'd you do that to me? I said, I have no choice. But she said, no, they're right. They're right. The Beach Preservation Act trumps everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Walter?
Good morning.
Morning.
Walter Brittingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. First of all, I looked at the agenda today. I thought it was kind of weak, but it was very dynamic. You have unbelievable education that we got here today. I give a comment back, and I think it's very gracious of you that a couple times you've mentioned John Hughes, your boss, and who was soil conservation at the time. Is that correct? But a very brief history in 30 seconds or less. And Larry Turner was city manager, and the city of Rehoboth went against Sam and myself and a few other people. and went to the state of Delaware and assumed responsibility, street aid expenditure, if you want to call it that. And Rehoboth assumed maintenance of all the streets. That's Lake Avenue, around the corner at what I call Kenny Lingo's house. And nobody thought anything about it, and just a little quirk in here. Sam and I said, even the bridges, and they threw out the bridges. They decided we didn't want the bridges. But one of the things that I didn't know who was in the background, but it was hundreds and thousands of tons of stone that goes up around the Henlopen Hotel.
I'm going to hide now.
What?
I don't know where you're going with this, but I'm going to hide.
No, this is a nice comment.
All right.
Or excuse me, I think it is. The graciousness of the state, we asked them to please take it back, and they said yes. But they added a covenant, and it helped that John Hughes was here. And that's why all the stone is around the end up at Lake Avenue and turns and goes across Surf Avenue. Another comment, and very, very short, was about beach tags. Rehoboth did look at beach tags years ago, back in the days of Denner Quillen II, Joe Hill, Richard Derrickson. There was a lot of controversy in it. There's probably paperwork out in those families, maybe not Mr. Quillen's, but there was research done on the effects at the time, and times change things. But there was a discussion, and beach tags was very controversial, but it's a new day. So again, thank you all for the forum and for your discussion, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yep.
Tony, thank you. You and I do go way back, back to requesting beach replenishment funding through earmarks. Just to be clear, if the Corps' budget is zero, there is no beach replenishment, correct?
Right now, in the House and Senate, there's no beach replenishment. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would there be discretionary funding at all such that earmarks might be an option?
We now call them members' requests. Yes, there's always, there should be a return to hopefully some kind of normalcy, and yeah, that should be a possibility, and after that should. I don't know the lay of the land in DC right now at all. So whether there's any, I will say this, without giving away too much inside trader information. I keep up a little bit with EPW leadership, and there's still bipartisan camaraderie in that committee, more than you'd ever guess. So I think there is still trying to work around the obstacles. There's still an attempt to make that done. So I think we should be talking along to our delegation and say, can we have those hallway conversations about members' requests?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor, just
Gossett.
another comment on this, and thinking this, sort of the ancillary impacts of this, as we've seen with other states. If we don't maintain the beach in that regards, that I think will have a certain effect on insurance rates, homeowners' insurance rates, because of vulnerability. HOA reserves for beachfront condominiums, et cetera, for maintaining that. And also, in effect, the property values of the town. If we don't have a beach for people to come to, that's certainly going to have, a very negative effect on the total property values.
Pat, if I were to guess just really quickly about how the conversation going forward would be among yourselves and the state. State holds up its hands, feds fold up their hands, we say we can't do it anymore. It'll be the impulse of decision makers here in this town to put up walls and keep the infrastructure safe. That will be if we can't maintain the beach. And so the first critical discussion will be, how much would it cost us to maintain the beach? How much would it cost us just to put in a wall and see what the future holds? And that would be probably the practical. You don't sit back and say, we'll do nothing. And you begin to look at critical places and say, where would we put a wall? We're going back to 1930s mentality, because beach nourishment is no longer achievable. And I don't know how those discussions go out, but that would be the impulse. If you all are going to lead this town forward, you do it with, like, what are our options? If we can't maintain, we do nothing? Well, you probably put walls up a certain way, bulkheads, seawalls, and then you sort of hope that the future's a better future than the present. And I think that's where it goes. You don't just give it up. But I think that's where you get down to the cost. How much does this cost? What are we going to lose? It's a cost versus loss. And that's where, and then, you know, if Oceanfront Hotel, I'm not naming names, but if Oceanfront Hotel might get $400 a night right now, Oceanfront, I don't even know what the rates are. But that beach is diminished, there's hardly any beach, the price goes to $350, they still can't fill it. The $300, they can't fill it. $250, they can't fill it. $200, they fill it. Because the $300, $400, they're going to Cape May, New Jersey, or Ocean City, Maryland. Your competition is not in Delaware. Your competition is Mid-Atlantic. That's where you have to look about if we lose our clientele, if we lose our fundamental economics, where does it go? It's not a loss overall, it's a redistribution. The value goes somewhere, somebody is maintaining it. So.
Thank you, Tony. We appreciate it. All your input, working with me on this.
Am I free to go now, Stan? Okay, I can go.
And now you may leave. With you leaving, I'm going to call recess for 5 minutes. We are now reconvened. Thank you for the recess. I'd like to change the order of items of business. I'd like to do citizen comment next. Is there any members of the public who would like to have their 3 minutes in front of us? This is typically for non-agenda topics. You've had your chance earlier on the agenda topics. This is for off-topic. Jeffrey, come ahead. Cite your name and relationship to the city, please.
Yes,
And
good morning.
don't forget the clock.
Right. Jeffrey Good, I'm a resident of Rehoboth. My comment is, as a resident and a taxpayer of the city, I believe what Commissioner Suzanne Good was saying makes a lot of sense to me as a taxpayer, in that I think all she was asking for is to be looped into a very important legal issue that the city could be subject to tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees if this lawsuit drags on and goes to trial. It could be a fortune, and exposure or costs that this lawsuit could bring on us. And so all I believe Suzanne is asking for is for the 3 newer members, which weren't a part of that early decision, to be also in the loop. Suzanne said she's not in the loop. I assume if she's not in, so are the other 2 newer members, such as Craig and Mark, also aren't in the loop. But I could be wrong. But assuming that's correct, the members like the mayor and the other commissioners that were in the loop, you naturally want to protect your decision. You think you made the right decision. A lot of people in the city don't think you made the right decision, and that's what this court case will be. And I think it's in everyone's interest to have everyone on the commission decide what to do and hopefully come to some settlement so the city doesn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting this for the next year or so. That's my comment.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Anybody else? If not, we'll come back to the commissioners. We'll review future meeting dates. The next regular meeting of the commissioners is Friday, July 18th, 2:00 p.m. With that, we'll finish up with commissioner announcements and comments. Anybody?
Yes, Mayor,
This is typically off-topic, and it's typically non-agenda items, because this is not discussion.
this is not an agenda
Commissioner
item.
Good, let me call on you. Commissioner Good, go ahead.
This is not an agenda item, and that the fact that it isn't an agenda item is an inherent problem with it. There are rumors all over town, and I have heard from a former commissioner that there is a possibility of a settlement, but because only the commissioners who made that bad decision and created the problem have been informed of what these terms might be. I don't know these terms, but I should. It is a breach of fiduciary duty to taxpayers not to share the settlement terms with all commissioners on the board. The judgment of those who made the hiring decision is clouded. They keep defending a bad decision. It makes no sense to allow them to be the ones to manage any settlement discussions. And I think this has been some sort of backdoor deal, or some sort of understanding has been reached with those who were on the board on April 8th, 2024, or those who were the one member who was absent but affirmed his support for it in July, and even said had he been there on April 8th, 2024, he would absolutely have voted in favor of this contract. So it's not in the best interest of the community to have those who have an incentive or a need to defend their position on this lawsuit be the only ones who are making decisions now on how to handle and manage a lawsuit. No one, this city tends to get sued frequently, and I think all of us know why. There's a lot of mismanagement, bad decisions, which engenders anger by citizens who feel they've been disenfranchised, ignored, and that is the case with the hiring decision of Mr. Taylor Tedder. So at a minimum, the mayor and the vice mayor should recuse themselves, and the remaining commissioners, Commissioner Saunders is undergoing some health issues, but he will return for the July 18th meeting. And he and I, for certain, have, I can say, having spoken to him, and he's allowed me to share this, he and I have not been brought up to date on a possibility of a settlement. I can't speak for Commissioner Thier because he has not returned my phone call on that matter. But in any case, at this point, I think we're doing a disservice to taxpayers to continue with this veil of secrecy and letting a select number of commissioners make decisions which excludes other commissioners from managing a financial decision in the end for the city.
Anybody else? If not, then this